Panama and Colombia are appealing for more help in managing the number of migrants crossing through the Darien Gap.
A massive surge of migrants flooding across the southern border from a country that you may not expect.
It's a huge number, 24,000. Those are the ones that turned themselves in or were captured, and you wonder how many were not.
We're talking about the crisis on the border. Tens of thousands of migrants continuing to seek asylum right here in the U.S.
In the Darien Gap is some place that one does not go without careful preparation.
This year alone, 300,000 desperate people have tried to cross it in a search of a better life.
The Darien Gap. The Darien Gap is an area that has gained a lot of attention lately because of the large number of migrants who are trying to cross its difficult terrain. In a recent interview with Tucker Carlson, Dr. Brent Weinstein detailed the nature of the Darien Gap, the migration patterns through it, and the significance of this event.
Panama and Colombia are appealing for more help in managing the number of migrants crossing through the Darien Gap.
Last year, at least 520,000 migrants crossed it to come here.
Yeah, these are indeed historic record numbers. By the end of the year, it could easily be more than 500,000 people.
And if they survive it, which not all of them do, they can then get relatively directly all the way through Central America into the U.S.
These details will be examined in this article. Situated between Panama and Colombia, the densely forested Darien Gap forms a break in the Pan-American Highway that stretches from Prudhoe Bay, Alaska to the southernmost point of South America. The gap is not a canyon, but rather a 60-mile expanse of impenetrable rainforest that has remained underdeveloped because of the risks involved and the difficulty of building a road across such a terrain. At least 520,000 migrants traversed the Darien Gap in the last year alone, despite the dangerous conditions that included hilly terrain, intense rainfall, and a lack of designated pathways. The perilous voyage frequently results in wounds, hypothermia, and even fatalities. The diversity of this migration is noteworthy. The migrants come from Asia, the Middle East, and South America, among other places. Usually arriving unprepared, migrants lose their possessions to weather or robbery before they even get to Darien. The dangerous nature of the journey is highlighted by the reports of several people coming across corpses along the way.
This year alone, 300,000 desperate people have tried to cross it in a search of a better life.
Stories over the past several years about the movement of hundreds of thousands, millions of people illegally into the United States.
Whole economy in some of the villages in Colombia close to the Darien Gap, which offer accommodation, transportation, guides.
In the Darien Gap is some place that one does not go without careful preparation.
These migrants are said to be reserved and seem to avoid most of the risks associated with crossing the Darien Gap because they can afford to travel by boat. The unique features of this group, such as the age distribution of its members being in the military and the absence of children, have sparked conjecture that the Chinese government may be orchestrating their movement. There are several issues associated with the migration wave that passes through the Darien Gap. The paths through the bush are clogged with trash and have harmed the indigenous fauna, which is bad for the ecosystem. Politically and economically, the movement has sparked debate over national border rules, the function of international institutions, and the possibility of foreign influence on home affairs. Furthermore, the absence of a well-thought-out plan to meet the needs of the migrants upon arrival exacerbates the humanitarian situation brought on by their perilous voyage. Comprehending the present migratory patterns to the United States necessitates an awareness of the Darien Gap, the intricacies of the circumstance, encompassing the participation of global organizations, the multiplicity of the migratory populace, and the possible geopolitical consequences, demand additional exploration and an interdisciplinary methodology in order to formulate all-encompassing remedies. The continuous flow of people across the Darien Gap is proof of human perseverance in the face of hardship, as well as the pressing need for an international conversation on migration management. Chinese asylum seekers. Chinese nationals are increasingly entering the U.S. through the southern border, claiming political asylum due to fears of President Xi Jinping's authoritarian rule and the experience of zero-COVID policies. The visa refusal rate for Chinese nationals has steadily increased from just 9% in 2014 to over 6 months. In the first 9 months of 2023, the U.S. Border Patrol made 22,187 arrests of Chinese nationals entering the country from Mexico, a 13 times increase from the same period in 2022.
A massive surge of migrants flooding across the southern border from a country that you may not expect.
Big increase in Chinese migrants coming through the U.S. border down at Mexico.
They're not just from China, they're also from other countries like Colombia, Ecuador, Peru. The largest group of Chinese nationals crossing our border illegally that I've ever seen.
Over 15,500 Chinese migrants were counted in Panama after traversing the Darien Gap, nearly 8 times as many from the same period in 2022 and more than 40 times that of 2021. China was one of the last countries to continue a zero-COVID policy, using mass PCR testing and digital health data tracking to justify supervised quarantines and even the shutdown of entire cities. This led to frustrations and disillusionment among Chinese migrants who felt there was no freedom in China. Economic drivers have been turbulent, with China's GDP growing by just 0.8% in the second quarter of 2023. A contributing factor has been the centralization of economic policy, manifesting in regulatory crackdowns on fast-growing industries such as technology, financial services, and private education. Migrant Destination suggests that while some fleeing China to the US-Mexico border are working class, many come from middle-class backgrounds. Chinese migrants typically spend between $5,000 and $7,000 for self-guided trips and up to $35,000 for the aid of smugglers, 3 times what Latin American migrants typically pay. Meaningful policy to address the rising numbers of Chinese asylum seekers will strengthen the U.S. asylum system, impact the U.S.'s relations with China, and increase the U.S. global standing. The Darien Gap, a route for Chinese migrants to the U.S., has gained popularity due to social media and private internet groups. The path involves flying to Ecuador, where they are not required to present a visa, and gathering with migrants from across Latin America and Colombia's northern border. The International Organization for Migration, or IOM, estimates that crossing to the Panamanian side could take up to 10 days for the most vulnerable. Most migrant deaths and disappearances in the jungle remain unverified due to lack of official data, difficulty accessing the area, and the little media coverage.
It's a huge number, 24,000. Those are the ones that turned themselves in or were captured, and you wonder how many were not.
Flood of migrants arriving from one of America's most powerful adversaries, and that is Beijing.
A growing number of people are making the long trek from China to cross the border.
Shows us why the Chinese migrants are willing to risk everything for a chance to make it to America.
Most Chinese cases are adjudicated in New York, where more than 17,000 are on backlog. Asylum seekers often go to neighborhoods with large Chinese populations where they can find housing, jobs, and immigration lawyers through community networks without needing to speak English. Community centers and non-profit organizations help fill the gap in informal networks, such as the Poi Tax Center in Chicago's Chinatown, which provides services such as reading and translating mail, scheduling medical appointments, and helping fill out immigration forms. Despite mixed reception from the pre-existing Chinese community, the outlook is largely positive for Chinese asylum seekers in terms of their actual cases. In December 2023, the approval rate for Chinese asylum application was 73.7%, significantly higher than the 48.5% average of all applications across the U.S. accepted in December. Even when an application is denied and all appeals are exhausted, it is highly unlikely that a Chinese migrant is deported. Immigration and pathways. Chinese migrants are making the journey to the U.S. border, with rumors suggesting they are an influx of military-aged men, fearing ties to China's military or allegiance to the Chinese Communist Party. However, this narrative is misleading due to the lack of data on the gender or age of migrants encountered and the fact that younger single adult men are more likely to travel physically demanding routes like the Darien Gap. Young people are also more likely to be well-versed in social media, which is the primary source of information for Chinese migrants traveling through Central America. To improve the U.S. standing in its competition with China, it is essential to take seriously the claims of political persecution and reaffirm the U.S.'s standing as a global leader for human rights. China has long been considered recalcitrant in repatriating Chinese nationals with deportation orders from the U.S., which can be leveraged against the U.S. when engaging with Taiwan. By taking advantage of the benefits that come with resettling refugees, the threat of alienating people in search of political, religious, and economic freedom can be defanged. Access to regular pathways for Chinese students and professionals has increased pressure to find alternative routes. The student visa refusal rate in 2022 was an unprecedented 35%, resulting in an estimated loss of $26.4 billion in tuition payments and living expenses for the U.S. economy over 4 years. To address this, the U.S. should expand access to F1 student visas and H-1B visas across the board, reducing encounters with U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers and the backlog of asylum cases.
We're talking about the crisis on the border. Tens of thousands of migrants continuing to seek asylum right here in the U.S.
Arrested more than 24,000 Chinese people for crossing the U.S. southern border illegally over the past year through September.
Large groups of Chinese nationals seen here being processed by Border Patrol agents.
Over Chinese migrants trying to cross the southern border illegally.
The illegal entryway is a new route for those hoping to live in America.
Managing the flow of migrants to the U.S. southern border requires federal agencies to establish a robust presence across social media, including platforms commonly used by Chinese migrants, and provide resources for Chinese language training for U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers at the southern border. Improving integration involves 3 tiers of resources: informal and personal networks, community centers and nonprofits, and city and state services. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.